we have Robin. Robin is also a Foresight Senior Fellow and has been to plenty of our workshops and has written one of the, I think, most interesting books on the issue of whole brain emulation in terms of its economic implications. It is not a sci-fi book, or at least not a fictional book. And so I'm very happy you're here and really excited for the talk.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just
All right,
fine.
great. And you see my slide. So as anticipated, I'm going to tell you a bit about this book I published back in 2016, which I still think is relevant. It's about the social science of brain emulations, somewhat of an odd topic. The book got good reviews, as you can see. There's a TED Talk with lots of views, and I just want to go through that and have some Q&A here. So I expect not to take the full 7 minutes. So the method of the book is to just take standard academic consensus in various areas and apply it to the hypothesis that a brain emulation exists and is cheap enough. And so in each different area, I just do sort of one-on-one versions of those fields and apply them to this particular question. I'm not focused on what kind of world I would like. I'm focused on what kind of world I guess would be most likely if we did the least to avoid it. So it's not supposed to be an inspiring story. The focus is on the brain emulations because that's where most of the action is. It's not focused very much on the humans, although there's things to say about the ordinary humans. We're focused on the next big era after ours. We're not trying to foresee the entire future of the universe. Just what would happen if brain emulation showed up? How would that change the world? And what would that era be like, especially after a transition? So the transitions are harder to predict. They are more turbulent and multiple equilibria, but once things settle down, there'd be more of a predictable scenario. So the idea was to predict that. And as an economist, I use our most robust standard tool for predicting social worlds, which we call supply and demand. More specifically, we assume a lot of competition, relatively low regulation. The idea isn't to say that that's the best possible world, but that's the most robust thing we can predict with our standard tools. And that's the basis for then thinking about whether you want to change the amount of competition or regulation. And for this analysis, in the early days, I assume brain emulations would be relatively simple in the sense that they're opaque. You just make an emulation and that's it. You can't sort of merge different people's emulations. You can't, slice them apart. You can't take different, one person's sport and combine it with another person's literature or something. You just have the emulation. You can run it fast or slow. You can copy them, but otherwise you can't change them. And so those were my working assumptions to set up an analysis. And the book is chock full of trying to show you that it was possible to do that, that it was possible actually to take a set of very specific technical assumptions about what a world would be, the technology would be like, and to work out an entire world of what that new civilization looks like. So again, the book is chock full of results. Many people complained it's just too dense. They'd rather read a story, but I was trying to prove that I could say a lot, that you could figure out many implications from just some basic assumptions like that. And so some of the numerical predictions are that this era would start sometime in the next century or so. There'd be a transition of less than a decade. And then this whole new era would last a relatively short time because the economy would grow much faster, doubling, say, monthly or even faster. And that means within a few years, this new economy would go through as many doublings as the previous economy has gone through in, say, the entire industrial era or the entire farming era, after which I don't feel so confident saying that this would continue. And that's the age of M era that's forecasted. A key prediction is that because it becomes so easy to make emulations, population grows faster than wealth, income per M falls to subsistence levels. And that lets us predict the economy in the sense that most of the economy is devoted to subsistence. So raw hardware, infrastructure, that's required for subsistence is where most of the efforts are going, making hardware, cooling it, powering it, supporting it structurally, et cetera. And it's a very competitive world, but it can even estimate roughly the slack is that the best is typically, say, about 3% better than the second best. And so that gives them that degree of slack in terms of extra leisure, if you like, beyond what's required for maximum productivity. The speed of emulations I forecast is typically roughly around 1,000 times human speed, although there's a range, enormous range from 1 billionth human speed to 1 million times human speed. I predict that most emulations retire after roughly a subjective century or two, and then they retire to a much slower speed and are replaced by copies of themselves from earlier in their life cycle. And most emulations in this economy are copies of the 1,000 most productive humans, each of which forms a clan, a new social unit, of which there are billions of copies of each. And I discuss, of course, the new social units and organization. And the last key feature is that this economy is concentrated in a small number of dense cities. Most of the rest of the planet is initially, at least, not of interest to them. They are so interested in getting close to each other, which they can get closer to each other than humans can. Many people are eager to evaluate this world, so I have a list of just quick evaluation criteria. People, according to what most people sort of like, it's a world without pain, hunger, grit, disease. Their bodies are always beautiful. They're mostly living and working in virtual reality. They are less afraid of death than we are. A vast population full of energy and activity, huge cities, much more lively and intricate than yours. Larger scale economy supports better art, story, drugs even. The typical emulation is at the level of our most celebrated virtuous people, like billionaires, Nobel Prize winners, Olympic gold medalists. That's the typical quality of an emulation. Their world feels more stable to them actually than ours does to us because of their speed. But on the downside, they are working most of the time for subsistence wages. We know what that world's like because that's how most of human history was. Although it's not boring work so much, they have more challenging work, but they are still working long hours in virtual reality. Most of the time are short-term copies that will end soon. They have more inequality and wealth and speed, big bureaucratic organizations, and they change their sort of mental styles to go to more back what I call farmer styles rather than our current forager styles. The key lessons I would say from my analysis.
You also have a 1-minute warning.
Good. Well, then that's right where I am. The key lessons for my analysis, I'd say, is first that it is possible to take some specific technical assumptions and actually use social science and everything we know to lay out a full, detailed civilization to say roughly what it would be like. Many people are skeptical that you really can do futurism of that form, and so this was an exercise to prove that. Another thing that you should have been able to predict is that any very different technology is going to produce a pretty different world, a pretty different civilization where a lot of things change, and most people don't like that. That is, if you describe a very different civilization that's just different in a whole bunch of ways, it makes the hairs on people's necks stand up. It's just weird and icky, and that's just a generic problem with futurism. When we tell the world what's likely to happen, they don't like it and disapprove and may even act to prevent it. And so that makes me reconsider whether it's such a good idea to be a futurist, to tell the world what's likely to happen. Most of the changes that will happen do not really need much in terms of preparation to deal with it. So if you think the reason for futurism is to try to figure out what sort of things might we want to prepare for ahead of time, it's a relatively small fraction of all the things that might happen that would call for any sort of preparation. In the case of Age of M, I would say my main thing I would say there's a call for preparation is the fact that humans would lose their jobs all at once, all of a sudden, and they'd be in trouble without another source of income. So we should just try to make sure that humans get robots took most job insurance. And I could tell you more about how to do that. And that's my talk.
Thank you, Robin. Maybe we have time for one question. Anyone? Yes, Lisa.
Thanks so much for your talk. I was curious, could you say a few more words surrounding your last point regarding certain topics not needing early prep? I'm kind of curious what you think about AGI, since this might also have social effects, even in the more near term.
Well, so robots, so most job insurance would also be my main recommendation for AGI. Right? That's the most robust problem people have identified for centuries, and it has a straightforward solution, and so we should just try to do that. With AGI, you have other sorts of concerns that people say need early prep for. I'm not so sure, but there's less of that in this scenario. So with AGI, you're worried more about the kind of AGI there might be and what values it has and what inclinations it has. With brain emulations, you're more sure what kinds of creatures these are. They're like us, and you're more sure that you're kind of okay with that. You're kind of okay with them being pretty human-like. Now, in the age of M scenario, they could become less human-like with time. They could modify themselves and change over time. But it's less clear what we want to do about that now, because people very much like us, thinking very much like us, with much more capacity and perception and knowledge would be at that point reacting to those choices. And it's hard for me to see how we could make a better choice than they would about how to deal with the possibility that at that time they might want to modify themselves more.
Awesome, thank you. Both of you, thank you so much for joining. You're getting a final